Elsie Paroubek was born in Chicago in 1906. Her parents, Franton and Carolina Paroubek, had migrated from eastern Bohemia, which at the time was part of the Austria-Hungary Empire, but is now situated within the present-day Czech Republic. Within Chicago, they lived on the city's south side, among other Czech families. Inside the household and the surrounding neighborhood, Elsie was known as Elsie, and her father Franton was called Frank. Frank worked as a painter. Carolina remained at home, caring for the children. Families in the area lived close to one another, and it was common for children to walk short distances on their own to visit relatives or friends. On the morning of Saturday, April 8, 1911, Elsie left the family home at 2320 South Albany Avenue. She was going to visit her aunt, Mrs. Julia Trampota, who lived nearby at 2325 South Troy Street. As Elsie walked toward her aunt's house, she saw her cousin Josie with several other children watching an organ grinder on the street. Elsie stopped with them and listened as the man played. When the organ grinder finished, he moved on toward 23rd Street. Most of the children followed him. Elsie did not go with them. Several hours later, Carolina Paroubek went to her sister's house on South Troy Street to bring Elsie home. Mrs. Trampota told her that Elsie had not been there. Before we continue, it's worth remembering that cases like this one survive only because they were written down, reported, and preserved long after the people involved were gone. If you value these forgotten histories, consider subscribing to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below as we return to Chicago in the spring of 1911. When Carolina Paroubek learned that Elsie had not arrived at her sister's house, she returned home expecting the child to appear later. Elsie had many friends living nearby, and it was not unusual for children to stop at another house and remain there for the afternoon. As the hours passed, Elsie did not return. Carolina continued to believe that her daughter might have gone to a friend's home and fallen asleep. No one in the neighborhood reported seeing Elsie after the morning. At around 9 p.m., Frank Paroubek arrived home from work. Carolina told him that Elsie had gone out earlier in the day and had not come back. Frank went to the police station on Hinman Street to report his daughter missing. At the station, Frank gave the child's name and address, but he did not get the response he expected. The men there repeated the same thought Carolina had voiced at home, that Elsie was probably asleep at a friend's house, and Frank walked back to his home with nothing settled. But despite the wait, the whole night passed without Elsie returning. The following morning, Frank went back to the police station. Elsie was still missing. With no sign of her and no explanation for where she had gone, the circumstances no longer fit the earlier assumption that she was simply visiting nearby. Police Captain John Mahoney was informed of the situation. He acknowledged the seriousness of the case and assumed responsibility for the search. When Frank Paroubek returned to the police station the morning after Elsie failed to come home, the situation was no longer dismissed. Police Captain John Mahoney was informed of the report and acknowledged the seriousness of the disappearance. He assumed control of the case and directed that a search be organized. Mahoney sent word out, and detectives from other stations were drawn into the case. Officers began retracing the route Elsie was believed to have taken, questioning residents and checking nearby streets. As news of the disappearance spread, information began to reach police from the neighborhood. One of the first reports came from a local boy named John Joski. He told officers that he had seen a Romany wagon on Kedzie Avenue, 1 block west of Troy Street, on the day Elsie disappeared. According to his account, the wagon contained 2 women, and one of them appeared to be holding a young girl who matched Elsie's description. Acting on this information, police turned their attention toward a nearby area where members of the Romany community had settled with their wagons near the river. Officers went to the camp and questioned those present. During the inquiry, they learned that one of the wagons had packed up and left the area early on the morning of April 9th, the day after Elsie was last seen. The timing of the wagon's departure drew notice. Detectives continued questioning residents of the camp and gathered details about the wagon's movement. No trace of Elsie was found at the site. The police naturally began to develop a working theory. Detectives told the press they were working on the theory that Elsie had been taken by someone traveling with the Romani community, removed from the neighborhood before her absence was noticed. The idea gained support as officers recalled an earlier case involving a young girl named Lillian Wolfe. 4 years earlier, Lillian had been taken under similar circumstances and was later recovered after a police investigation. The comparison was discussed among investigators as they weighed the likelihood that Elsie had been taken away in the same manner. As the search continued, Frank Paroubek offered a reward of $50 for any information that would lead to his daughter's safe return. The offer was made publicly in the hope that it would prompt someone with knowledge of Elsie's whereabouts to come forward. At the same time, police began exploring other possibilities. The police chief ordered drainage canals in the area to be dragged, concerned that Elsie may have fallen into the water. Officers searched the canals while continuing to follow reports connected to the wagon. Additional information reached investigators from a 14-year-old girl named Emma Kubat, who lived on the same street as the Paroubek family. She told police that she had last seen Elsie in the company of an organ grinder. Acting on the statement, detectives went to the Italian Quarter near West 14th Street and South Halsted Street to search for the man. Officers checked properties in the area and questioned residents. Their inquiries produced no information that placed Elsie there, and the organ grinder was not located. After the search, the lead was not pursued further. While officers continued to act on reports as they arrived, no single explanation accounted for all of the information. Police divided their attention between the wagon sightings, the canal searches, and statements from neighbors, with each line of inquiry pointing in a different direction.
On April 12, a photograph of Elsie appeared in the newspapers. The image had been enhanced by an artist and was accompanied by a description of the child. She was described as small, with light hair and blue eyes. At the time she disappeared, she had been wearing a red one-piece dress, lace shoes, and black stockings. The photograph was printed again in later editions as the search continued. Newspaper coverage remained constant. Each day brought renewed attention to the case, and Elsie's disappearance stayed before the public. On April 17, the papers printed not only a full-length image of Elsie, but also photographs of her parents, Frank and Carolina, and her aunt, Julia Trampota. Alongside the images was a message from police asking the public to remain watchful. Investigators continued to focus on the wagon theory. Frank Paroubek accompanied detectives as they attempted to trace the wagon that police believed Elsie may have been taken in. Reports placed it in Round Lake, Illinois, a town roughly 50 miles northwest of Chicago. Local farmers were informed and asked to watch for the arrival of Romani wagons and any sign of the missing child. Some residents took matters into their own hands, confronting members of the Romani community and attempting unauthorized searches of their property. As attention increased, several wagons left the area and moved on. Sightings were reported again, this time in the village of Volo in Lake County and later near the city of McHenry. In each location, residents claimed to have seen a young girl believed to be Elsie traveling in a wagon. Police followed the reports as they arrived, moving from town to town. Eventually, officers intercepted the wagon they had been searching for, but the chase ended in disappointment. The child inside was identified and confirmed not to be Elsie. On April 17, Captain John Mahoney received an anonymous telephone call. The caller claimed that a child matching Elsie's description had been seen in the company of a man at a hotel in Western Springs, Illinois. Mahoney sent men to the hotel at once. They went through the place and questioned whoever they could, but found no child and no man matching the description. That same day, reporters questioned police about the existence of a ransom note. It was suggested that a demand for $500 had been made. Officials did not confirm the report, but they did not deny it either, stating only that such a note could not be ruled out. During this period, Frank Paroubek began receiving anonymous letters written in English. The letters accused the family and contained insulting language. Frank showed the letters to detectives, who advised him to keep them. Instead, Frank destroyed the letters by burning them. On April 20, attention turned briefly to the Paroubek home itself. Elsie's 6-year-old brother, Frank Jr., was seen digging in the yard on South Troy Street with a pick and shovel. The activity raised concern among neighbors, and police questioned nearby road workers about the possibility of a recent excavation. The workers denied that any digging related to the disappearance had taken place. Reports from the public continued to reach the police. Some claimed to have seen a young girl traveling with adults. Others placed Elsie in different parts of the city or nearby towns. Each report was examined and, when possible, investigated.
As the search continued, a familiar name reappeared in the investigation. Lillian Wolfe, now 11 years old, came forward and spoke with police. 4 years earlier, Lillian had been taken under circumstances that later became known throughout the city. She had lived in captivity before being recovered. Investigators listened as she described her experience and offered what she could recall about how she had been taken and kept. Through Lillian's account, police were advised to speak with a man who had been involved in her abduction and was now serving a prison sentence. That man told investigators they should look for an individual named Elijah George. Detectives traced George to Argyle, Wisconsin, and attempted to question him. George refused to cooperate, and no information linking him to Elsie's disappearance was established. Within the department, doubts about the wagon theory began to grow. Inspector Healy expressed concern that investigators had placed too much weight on reports involving traveling wagons. He ordered renewed searches of drainage canals and other locations where a child might have fallen or been concealed. On April 23rd, Lieutenant John Costello publicly stated that kidnapping leads had been exhausted. He told reporters that he believed Elsie may have been harmed shortly after leaving home and hidden in a cellar, barn, or other structure. Men were sent through buildings in the neighborhood, looking into cellars, barns, and back rooms where a child could be hidden. Around this time, another report reached investigators. A person claimed to have seen Elsie speaking with an unfamiliar man shortly after the organ grinder scene on the morning she disappeared. The man was not identified, and the report did not lead to a suspect. At the end of April, nearly a month had passed since Elsie left home. Police continued to search, but their statements reflected a growing belief that the child was no longer alive. By May 7th, Captain John Mahoney told reporters that he believed Elsie Paroubek was dead. Despite that conclusion, he stated that the search would continue until the child was found. 2 days later, on May 9th, an electrical engineer named George T. Scully was working near the power plants at Lockport along the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. While near the water, Scully noticed an object floating in the canal. When he and others moved closer, they saw that it was the body of a child. Authorities were notified, and police were sent to the scene. Lieutenant John Costello took charge and arranged for the body to be recovered. Based on the size of the child and the length of time Elsie had been missing, officers believed it might be her. Costello went to the Paroubek home and informed the parents. Frank Paroubek was brought to the canal to view the body. He was unable to identify it. Carolina Paroubek was then brought forward. After examining the child, she identified the body as that of her daughter. Following the identification, arrangements were made for an inquest. Coroner William Werk was assigned to preside. Frank Paroubek later appeared before the coroner's jury and testified regarding the events surrounding Elsie's disappearance. As word of the discovery spread through the neighborhood, Carolina Paroubek was seen running through nearby streets, crying out that her child had been found.
After the recovery of Elsie's body, physicians examined it and reached different conclusions. Doctors Kingston and Paddock reported that there was no water in the child's lungs and stated that Elsie had died before being placed in the canal. Doctors Lount and Hunter, however, said they could find no clear evidence of violence and did not agree that the cause of death could be determined with certainty. Coroner Peter Hoffman later stated that he believed suffocation to be the cause. As the medical disagreement became public, police continued their work. Inspector Healy announced that 40 detectives had been assigned to the case. He stated that investigators were concentrating on the possibility that Elsie had been harmed by someone living in the neighborhood. Healy told reporters that an arrest within a week would not surprise him. On May 12th, Elsie's funeral was held. Nearly 3,000 people attended. The funeral procession moved through the neighborhood before continuing to Bohemian National Cemetery, where Elsie was buried. Police Chief John McWeeny addressed the public, stating that all available resources would be used to pursue the case. Around this time, the reward for information was increased. The question of how Elsie died continued to be debated publicly. Some physicians maintained that drowning was possible, while others held to the view that she had been killed before entering the water. No final determination resolved the disagreement. During this period, detectives began focusing on a man known as Joseph Kesty, also referred to as Joseph Canesty. Police searched a shack where he had been staying near the canal. Items reported from the search included a green hair ribbon, signs of recent digging, and a hemp sack. The property owner, David Shays, told police that Canesty had recently been asked to leave. On May 10th, before he could be questioned further, Canesty died by stepping in front of a train. 5 days later, on May 15th, police announced that they did not believe he was responsible for Elsie's death.
After Joseph Canesty's death, police continued to follow the remaining reports connected to the case. One involved the body of a well-dressed man found in the Willow Springs Canal. A Polish prayer card bearing the name Sig Hoff was discovered on him. Because of the location and timing, officers examined whether the man might be connected to Elsie Paroubek's death. No link was established, and the matter was closed. Another report arrived in the form of an anonymous letter claiming that a girl had been seen near the canal with an unknown man. Police attempted to identify the sender and locate the person described, but neither could be found. The letter produced no evidence and was dismissed. Investigators also looked into a man named Mr. Cannella, who briefly emerged as a person of interest. Before he could be questioned, Cannella left the area. Police were unable to locate him, and he did not reappear in the investigation. Efforts to find a former lodger who had once lived with the Paroubek family also failed, as did attempts to trace the source of earlier anonymous letters. With no remaining leads, police activity slowed and then stopped. The case remained on record, but no further action followed. In the years that came after, the members of the Paroubek family died and were buried, their lives continuing beyond the shadow of the investigation. Decades later, after the death of a Chicago hospital janitor named Henry Darger in 1973, his artwork and writings were discovered. Among them were references to newspaper photographs of missing children and a note describing the loss of a picture taken from a paper in 1911. Some researchers later suggested the photograph may have been Elsie's. Others disagreed. No evidence ever connected Henry Darger to Elsie Paroubek. Frank died on May 12, 1913, 2 years to the day of Elsie's funeral. Carolina died on December 9, 1927. They were laid to rest beside Elsie in Bohemian National Cemetery. Elsie was not remembered for what she did, but for what was taken from her. She was a child who left home on a familiar walk and never lived the life that followed. No court ever weighed her death, no verdict ever spoke her name, and no one was made to answer for the harm done to her. What remained was a family who carried the loss, and a city that once searched for her and then moved on. Elsie's life ended without justice, and that absence, more than any unanswered question, is what has endured. If you have thoughts about this case, you're welcome to share them in the comments. And if you value careful, forgotten old documentaries like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel.